Hey guys, jumping in really quickly at the start of this podcast to say that if you join us on Patreon, that's patreon.com/Children of the Forest, and you get there before the end of November, we are doing a limited run of stickers for the conference Song Wars. We're doing a sticker for Wet Rope, we're doing a sticker for Not Amnesia, and we're doing a sticker for the banger tune that is Bin Juice. So if you want to get your hands on those stickers, we're not doing them again after the end of November, so head to patreon.com/Children of the Forest and get signed up. That way we can post those stickers straight out to you. You really should. It'll be really good, I promise.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go! Oh, it's a good one today.
Listeners, you've got a treat. You've got a treat. I was so pleased that Naomi agreed to say yes to the podcast that I was a bit like starstruck, you know, when someone goes, sure, I'll do that. And you're like, oh my God. I'm actually talking to Naomi Fisher. I'm so happy. And yeah, she was so nice and so interesting. And we had a really good old chat. And if you haven't read her books, listeners, just get on it. And hopefully if you're thinking of reading the book, A Different Way to Learn, which is her latest book, then hopefully this podcast will give you a little flavour of it and some reasons.
We'll put some links in the doobly-doos underneath the podcast so you can click straight through and go and get it straight away.
I for one, I have looked at her website, obviously lots, but I am, I think, going to look more detailedly, that's not a word, detailedly, at her sort of webinars and courses, because having met her in person, I was like, yes, I would like to do more with you. Yeah. Teach me the things in your brain.
Mate, this big conversation. So I would say the only heads up people need is that Naomi is very much unashamedly and anti-school. Yes. So if you can either hold that in your head and go, this is, a particularly anti-school conversation, but I do think everyone who does forest school, because you are involved in an alternative style of education, you will find something in this podcast to resonate with. I resonated, obviously. I was there. I resonated with all of it. I'm just a big old singing bowl.
Oh, yeah. I could feel it. I could feel the vibrations through the internet. But also, and I think even especially if you are someone who is like practicing forest school within a school setting, to listen to her opinions as a psychologist about school and kind of what's wrong with it. And then to go, okay, well, I'm in this system, but I'm doing forest school in this system. What opportunities might that offer me? Like, it's like another focus, I guess, to really think about the potential opportunities that your forest school session gives for those children who are in the system, and the benefit that you can bring. So yes, that's a good heads up, I think, to give.
And guys, as always, you can support what we're doing, support the podcast. You can do it on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Children of the Forest, and if you sign up before the end of November, we're doing a stickers pack, and the sticker has Bin Juice on it and Not Amnesia and Wet Rope. So if you want to get hold of those stickers, we're not going to do them again. This is it. I've ordered them. Sign up before the end of November. Otherwise they're gone. You can also now sign up as a subscriber on Spotify. So some of you listen on Spotify. You can click on the little button straight away. And that also helps to support the work that we're doing with the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to our new Patreons this month. It's all such a little joy to go, oh, a new person is supporting. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It makes a huge difference.
Yes, thank you so much. Enjoy the chat. We're here. Wem and I are here with, Wem, you've written a very lovely introduction.
Well, it's very short, but we're here with Dr. Naomi Fisher, a clinical psychologist and author of a few books on self-directed education and trauma and autism. and you've written a book, Changing Our Minds, and your latest book, which we're specifically talking about today, which is called A Different Way to Learn, Neurodiversity and Self-Directed Education. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for this book. So as a parent of a PDA child myself, I feel like it really is something completely new that I've sort of been waiting for and gone, thankfully, a book that you kind of read about education rather than reading it and going, no, that's not going to work. No, nice idea, but no, not for my family. That, this book really kind of speaks to that. And so thank you for writing it. And I just wondered if we could start off by just you telling us a little bit about your journey to this book and how it came about.
There are so many stories of my journey. I never know which story to start on. But I think maybe one of the journeys that led to this book specifically was that I came to self-directed education having already studied as a psychologist. I already had my, before I had my children, I already had my doctorate in clinical psychology. I already also had a PhD in autism. So I already came with a kind of perspective on neurodiversity and difference. And what really pulled me into self-directed education with my own children was just seeing how the education system didn't marry up to what I had learned as a psychologist, as a very conventionally trained psychologist, about how children learn and how child development happens and how learning happens. It wasn't what was happening in schools. Even, we had an excellent local primary school down the road from us, and my son had a place there. And I went along to the school in, the sort of induction meeting they had before the summer. And my son was only 3 at that point because he's summer born, young in his year. And they gave us a list of words that they wanted us to teach the children over the summer. And it was like a list of and they were words like the, and, if, but. And they said, these are key words, be really helpful if the children come back recognizing them. And I was like, here's my 3-year-old who is totally about action, things that are interesting for him, getting his hands in the mud, jumping on things, climbing stuff. And all of his learning up to this point has been about learning because it has meaning for him. He's done things because it has meaning for him. And now suddenly I'm being asked to take this big sidestep and say, yes, I know these words on the page aren't things that you want to learn to read, and actually are probably words that you haven't even thought of as words yet, because what 3-year-old think, these are little joiner words. They're not like words like mummy or his name or anything. And I'm going to spend my summer stressing about you not learning these words. I can just see that happening right away. And I think that was a kind of moment for me of, why do schools do this? Why do we take learning out of context? And I felt like for the first 3 or nearly 4 years of his life, I had been able to put in play the psychological principles that I had learned about child development. I had been able to help him follow his interest, to facilitate what he wanted to do. And now suddenly it couldn't have been clearer that all of that was being taken away, in terms of now what we want you to do as the parent is help us with the way that school thinks learning should be. And when schools talk about parents' role, what they generally mean is the parent doing the things that the school wants to do. So I've always thought it was unfair that schools can send homework home, but parents can't send work into school all the time. And, they can't say, well, my child's at school today. I'd really like them to have, at least an hour of free play. That's really important. If you could just put that in, that's not allowed. But it's fine for schools to send back stuff, say, just fill in this reading diary. We want you to be doing this in your time. Anyway, so all of that made me think, actually, no, this school thing, we're not going to do that for a while. But also because I could really see the damage that it did to young people. And I think that was, again, because of my perspective as a clinical psychologist. I had seen the results of the system. I had talked to young people about how things had gone wrong, and I would often not see them until very far down the line. So the young people I saw, they might be 14 and they would be refusing to go to school, or they would be on the verge of expulsion from school, or they would be showing distress in so many other ways, like eating problems, self-harming, all kinds of stuff. And then it would be kind of, let's send you to the psychologist to try and solve that by essentially changing the way you think and feel, because that can be the role of the psychologist. And yet when I heard their stories, I just heard of a huge mismatch all the way through between what school was offering and what this young person found meaningful, but also the ways in which these specific young people learned. And so, yeah, so that's a bit of a long roundabout way to say this made me think so much about why I wanted to write both my books. But the neurodiversity element with the self-directed education came particularly because I was in lots of groups. Obviously, as a parent who's unschooling, you end up in lots of Facebook groups. And I was aware that on the groups, and often when people talk about unschooling and self-directed education, there's often a kind of slight PR element about it. So there's often a sort of, it's so great. They're doing all this amazing stuff. They're learning from their interests. It's so fantastic. And I knew from my own experience and also from the experience of other parents who I sort of knew in person as opposed to online, that it often wasn't really like that, particularly if your children were different in some way. And there was and people felt, even though we've taken our kids out of the school system because we thought that wasn't going to work for them, we're now in another setting where we kind of feel that we're not recognized, that, that we can't say, hang on a minute, this isn't working for us. Maybe, I know you're a forest school, maybe I take my child to the forest and they spend their whole time clinging to me and saying, when can I go back on my iPad? And that isn't reflected in what I'm reading and seeing. And so I thought, okay, I want to write the book that reflects that experience. And it was immediately obvious to me that the way to do that was to talk to parents and people and adults and, to make it about real life stories, because that's so powerful. So that's the long roundabout story to that book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. The parent stories and the children's own sort of little chunks of text throughout the book where they're telling their own stories are so powerful and really kind of back up the sort of ideas that you're saying. Did you sort of start there? Were they really key to this book?
Yes. Yeah. So when I decided to write this book, which was actually in lockdown, I'd already written my first book. The first book hadn't come out yet. But I knew while I was writing the first book that there was a second book that was specifically about neurodiversity and that was also more focused on how to do it. So I felt the first book was more about the education system. And I was right. Lots of teachers have read that first book, which really surprised me. I didn't think teachers would read it because it's got quite a lot about the education system and where it comes from. And I wanted the second one to be about, the nuts and bolts. And so I started off with interviews. So I interviewed, that was, in lockdown, I thought, oh no, I'm stuck here in lockdown. Okay, I'm going to do lots of interviews over Zoom with people whilst I'm stuck and we can't go out anywhere. And so I started contacting people and then I did all the interviews first and then the book came from that. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's really interesting. You talk about the the safe to learn pyramid. In a lot of the book. Could you for people that haven't quite got there yet, could you kind of describe what that is for people?
Yeah. So that was really born from this idea that there's a lot of talking in self-directed education about being free to learn. If we let children learn freely, then they will. And then for some children, that doesn't quite seem to happen that easily. And then their parents are left thinking, but why aren't they freely learning in the way that they're meant to? And so it was really born of this kind of idea that there are particular priorities that humans have and that we need in order to start to explore and learn and feel safe. Well, and the first thing is safety. The bottom of the pyramid is safety. And that's not just physical safety, it's also psychological safety and physiological safety. So you need to have a sense of felt safety in your body before you're really able to start exploring. And if you don't have that sense, then you're not going to start exploring and learning, because instead your priority is going to be, how do I keep myself safe? How do I keep myself alive? Exactly. And I think lots of children in the school system are in that kind of mode. But also if a parent has thought that their role as a parent, and this is a completely natural thing for many parents to think their role is either to kind of get the child to conform to a mold that they don't conform to particularly well. So maybe to get them to do the things that school values, for example. If a parent has really thought, some parents really take on this idea of school readiness, for example, and they say, okay, I've got to get them practicing this. I've got to get them doing their fine motor skills before they're 2. We've got to read every day, even if the child is very clearly saying, no, 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 no. The parent has this strong sense that this is what a good parent is. This is what I must do. And so I think then you can end up with children not feeling safe. because of the very not at all, because of the parent who has trying their absolute best and they're doing what they think is right, but there's a real mismatch with this child. And so I think you do safety's first, and then when a child feels safe, then they start to be able to explore a bit. And that might be really tentative first. It won't be, I'd like to read a book now, generally. It'll more generally be things like, can we go to the shop? Or I'd like to play that game. Or would you do this with me? And they're just, I think about it, little green shoots. They're just putting out little sort of feelers of I'm interested. And then the top of the pyramid is when they're thriving and flourishing, and when they're able to think about, am I interested in that? Do I want to do that? Explore that. And I think when I talk to parents of self-directed learners about this, they recognize it. They kind of go, oh yes, we went through that process. I can remember coming through that process, particularly I think if they come out of school, but not just if they come out of school. I do think for some children, feeling safe in the world is a much bigger problem. It's harder for them. It takes longer, and it can be the work of a lot of those early years of childhood is actually about being able to feel safe in your body, wherever you are. And that's what has to be the priority. And I think we get into this kind of panic with school where we think the academics have to come in and everybody has to be doing reading and writing when they're 4 or 5. And we prioritize that over this health safety. And that is really detrimental to lots of kids.
If you're enjoying the Forest School podcast, we wanted to let you know about the ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content that you can get by joining us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Children of the Forest today and become a Patreon, you get ad-free episodes of the regular podcast plus bonus things. Plus, when we have guests coming on, we try and get a little bit of a heads up and shout out there so that our Patreon supporters can ask us any questions that they want of those guests before the interview takes place. So head to patreon.com/Children of the Forest. We really appreciate your support.
That's a really good point, and also a good point, I think, to make in alternative education, with your home edding or whatever, that I think we, if you're a parent or an adult involved in that kind of world, whether through, the parent or a facilitator of some kind of alternative setting, that we still often feel that pressure to allow, make sure the child has all these experiences, make sure, so when I was home edding, it was like, oh my gosh, well, there's the farm school. We should go to that. It's amazing. Now that we don't have to go to school, we can do all these amazing things. Do the things. And it wasn't even about academic skill. It was just about do all the things so you can find out what you want. And I was trying to go in at the top of the pyramid, already going, because this might lead to this amazing interest. And actually, there's still, as you say, and you're missing a lot of the time the tiny green shoots that you're describing. Sometimes if you just chill, and be watching for the tiniest little. But then again, also without kind of jumping on it and going,
absolutely. Oh my gosh, you're jumping. Oh, no. You play it cool. You see those little green shoots. You're like, okay, we could do that tomorrow.
Inside, you're jumping around and feeling very excited.
Keep that quiet. Absolutely.
Poker face.
There is no better way to squash a green shoot than jump on it with enthusiasm. And it's like you're trying to put it up, isn't it? It's like the parents going, so great, fantastic. And of course, the child's going to go, no way. Sorry, I'm going back with that. Yeah, I think that's a really common thing. I remember that myself from starting off as a home educating parent. There's also this pressure that if we're not going to do school, we have to do something better than school. And just an absence of school isn't enough. And it isn't necessarily about academic thing, but it's about, they've got to be doing this and learning this and learning this. And again, you read these stories of kids doing amazing things. And you're like, oh my goodness, how are we going to find our amazing things? What are we going to do?
Absolutely. There is that culture, isn't there, of sharing, oh gosh, we do this on a Monday and this on a Tuesday.
Life, isn't it?
And you're like, oh no.
Yes, or we're learning many languages and we're doing this and we're doing this. And it's like, oh, yes, and we're just at home. Exactly. How do we, no one's going to write about those stories, are they? Because it doesn't have the same cachet.
Absolutely. And I think the same is true if you aren't necessarily a home edding parent, but you are running a forest school or some kind of alternative learning setting, that you might be tempted to kind of like, right, parents are paying for this, or, you know, I'm providing this facility and it's on me to make sure that these children are taking part in all of the opportunities that are available to them. And oh goodness, they've been doing the same thing now for quite some time. I should go in there and suggest that they change and stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, it's only through experience and observation that you notice that it's the same pyramid going on, that for some children to be out of their home, to be in a group of other children in a strange wood is really freaky.
It's
so
huge.
If they need to be, you know, looking at their Pokemon cards for quite a long time every day to kind of get settled, to ride with that and go, this is what you need to be safe, and actually to watch for those green shoots exactly the same way, and go, you know, and anything you choose to do is fine, is the way to go.
That's the safety. That's the real safety. I think that is the most fundamental thing about safety, knowing that I can choose what I can do and I can stop when I want to stop. And unfortunately, school operates by taking that away right away, because it says you're going to do what we want you to do and you can't leave. You can't stop. You can't choose. And I don't just mean leave in terms of actually leaving, because obviously it often isn't feasible for younger children in particular to leave a setting. But I mean kind of leave in terms of, say, I'm not going to do this. You know, a kind of psychological, actually right now, I need a bit of time out here.
Just step away from something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just saying, you know, not for me. And I think we undervalue that so much. Like I think about this a lot, that we just don't value this right to say, no, actually, I don't want to do this. We always value participation when it comes to children. It's always joining in is good, not joining in, not so good. But actually, as adults, that ability to decide that you've had enough and this isn't something you want to join into can be the difference between an adult who's living a happy, fulfilled life and the adult who's burnt out. Yeah. And yet we're not nurturing that in our children. And our very young children are often the best at that. I find they're often really good at knowing, nope, that's not for me, but we kind of try and squash it out of them.
That's one of the green shoots that I most enjoy seeing, though, is the very quiet. It's almost like a quiet growing rebellion, which is that, like, if we've had someone that's come out of school, they are probably masking to a certain degree, neurodivergent or not. They are going to be going, okay, you're bigger than me and very hairy, so I will do what you say and go along with this thing. And then the first time you see them kind of go, like, look off to the side or like go and do it, I'm like, that's the shoot that I care about. That's the one, more than great? Oh wow,
joining in.
And I was saying to Wem the other day about like there's trying to untangle this thing about unconditional approaches and particularly outdoor forest school education, and going this sort of narrative that comes out that's like the kids that might not be particularly suited to indoor academic learning, and then they come outside and the story is like, but they lit the fire or they did this with the wood thing. And I'm kind of going, I'm now at a point in my own journey where I'm unpicking that and going, okay, but it's still good because they did the directed task. It's not actually about that quiet rebellion, or you saw them doing something spiritual, or you're just going, you've just changed the spelling test to the fire lighting test and you're praising it. It's just a different yardstick. So actually trying to unpick it even more and go, okay, there's something, I don't know, self-esteem wise that is more interesting, I think, to see developing. Hey, lovely forest school people. I know people listening to this, you are bored of doing damper bread. You are bored of doing marshmallows. You're probably bored of doing hot chocolate. So I wanted to let you know about the book Forest School Cooking that I've written. It is half recipes that are going to take you away from the boring marshmallows and damper bread that are driving you mad, and into like cool meals and things on sticks and fast things and slow things. And the other half of the book is all about different ovens and stoves and things that you can build to cook in different ways. I know we personally have had it where you realise that what we're doing this week, we're frying something on the frying pan. What we're going to do next week, we're going to fry something in the frying pan. So building up loads of different ovens like rocket stoves and pizza ovens, it's all in the book, and it helps you to grow your cooking from something that the kids are just waiting to get the sugar into them to something that they're actually enjoying and getting a bit more out of that cooking. So you can find your copies on Amazon of Forest School Cooking and take your cooking to the next level today.
That's so interesting that you say that, because I think I have a bit of a talk about that in the first book, actually, about how sometimes alternative education can actually be equally rigid to mainstream. It's just a completely different set of rigidity. I mean, outdoor education is a prime example where some people, I know from my involvement with lots of different self-directed settings, that there can be massive tension between parents, some of whom really think their children should be spending all their time outdoors because they think that's what they want for their child from a childhood. And then the child doesn't necessarily agree. And it's another set of assumptions of what they should be doing. Instead of them sitting in the seat at school, nicely performing and doing what they're meant to be doing, they're having this amazing time in the forest or being outdoors all the time, being a kind of wild child. And that's another set of expectations which the parent has brought rather than the child.
Yeah. And sometimes it comes from like, I think there's something in both, I've got Changing Your Mind in front of me, so I can put them down. In both books, it's talking about that thing of like separating yourself from the needs of other people. I think, let's say outdoors is particularly perhaps prone to the people who run outdoor settings are the people who feel innately comfortable in the outdoors, in outdoor clothing. So we take it as a given that like, it's whenever I see stuff that is like outdoors makes people feel calm, or I don't have this when I'm outside. I'm like, you don't, which is great. And it's twofold. It's one, I think, for us as forest school leaders, being able to pivot and go, okay, so where are you now? Let's meet you there on that journey. Maybe it's the whole day in the shelter with tablet, and then we go from there. Or maybe it's about being very honest and like going, this is not a panacea, this is not the fix all for everybody. This is not right for this person at this time. Maybe it will be in the future. Maybe it will never be. But we're not here to be like the golden pill that fixes all the things.
You just raised such a good point there, I think, about who does these things as well. Like, you're right. It's people who, you're not going to go and run a forest school if you hate being outdoors, are you? So we don't have those.
There's no
it's
money
a bit
in
like,
it. I wouldn't worry.
Exactly. But also, I think in schools you've got a similar thing, that the people who run schools are the people who've done well at school and who felt generally happy at school, because otherwise why would you choose to continue to be a teacher or to work in schools? At some level they have succeeded at school too. It's the people who have felt really alienated at school, or who have found it just absolutely not for them. They're not going to be represented in the people running schools. I mean, they're not going to be represented, honestly, in our government as well. I think there's a problem with general lack of representation of people for whom these systems don't work, because we tend to see that as a failure in the person rather than as a failure in the system or a lack in the system.
I wondered, Naomi, that kind of brings me on there's one of the pages in your most recent book, you've got the list of skills from school and the list of school, and so sort of leading on from that idea that like people who did well or succeeded in that system are going to see that. I hope it's not going to sound rude, but I imagine some people have seen that table and had very polarizing responses to that, because if you did well, if the school system worked for you, that is going to look like a very challenging table.
Can I just give some examples from the table now so listeners know what we're talking about? So in the school skills, there might be things like controlling your emotions outwardly until the end of the day. And in the self-directed education skills, it would be managing your emotions when they arise. School skills, doing what you're told. Self-directed education, working out what you want to do for yourself. School skills, compliance. Self-directed education, collaboration, that kind of thing. So my bias shines through, of course. I mean, no one reads my books thinking that I'm a proponent of conventional education, I think. And I always think, it's okay to be biased, because most other books are biased in a different direction, but they never state it. It's just assumed. Like, one of the things that brought me to this area was realizing that most of the stuff I read about child development assumed that a well-functioning child goes to school, that is what a functioning means in childhood, that you are at school. Anyway, but about that list, let's go back to that. Yes, it's been very polarizing. Some people love it, some people hate it. But I felt it was really important to put it in there, because I do feel, and as I'm someone who achieved highly at school. I did well at school, despite not really liking it, and despite having extended periods of refusing to go to school. I did it well. But I felt that I learned a lot of things at school which really were just about how to manage school. They were about how to cope in the school culture. And I think when you have a child who doesn't go to school,
that becomes really obvious. That was one of the things that when my children didn't go to school, I didn't expect to see. I didn't know, because I was, I went to school, everyone I knew went to school. School culture just surrounded us all completely. And when something surrounds you, it's invisible. You don't see it. So then when your children don't go to school and they're not learning school culture, you start to think, my goodness, I didn't realize that that's actually something I learned at school. That this is, I learned that, for example, hierarchies, you've just talked about that, about, people come to the forest school, they see you, you're bigger than them. They expect, and you look like you're going to tell them what to do. So they expect you to tell them what to do. And they expect that their role is to do what they're told, because that's what you learn at school. You learn the hierarchies at school. And if children don't go to school, they don't learn those hierarchies. And so they behave quite differently. Yeah. I mean, anyone who goes to a group of home ed, a home ed group, like a home ed museum trip, we went on several of these kind of things when my kids were younger. And I always think the people at the front just didn't quite know what they were dealing with when they had their group of home ed kids, because it was, you'd have the kid who was so interested and couldn't stop asking questions. Then you'd have the kid who was there with their headphones and their tablet. Then you'd have the kid who was sitting at the edge but didn't want to go home but was there. Then you'd have the kid who brought their stuff and was playing, and it would it's great. It's everyone being themselves in this setting. And then you'd see the school groups and all the kids would be sitting in rows, facing forwards, listening, or they'd have the appearance of listening. They wouldn't necessarily be listening and learning. And I always used to think, we've got this whole idea of what learning looks like, and it's the school-based system. But who's to say these home ed children aren't learning loads more in different ways about what's going on here? Just because they're not sitting facing the front and appearing to do what they're told doesn't mean there's not loads of learning. And I always used to notice after those kind of trips, when we did go on them, that what my children would learn from them was often something really unexpected. It was very unlikely to be what the person at the front thought they were going to be learning from it. It would be, and it might well be just something we noticed on the train on the way there that was the most, like one time we went on a big school trip, a big home ed trip. I think it was at the Science Museum or something. And on the way back, we saw this most amazing rainbow on the train, just this most beautiful rainbow I've ever seen. That's what we remember from that trip. It's all about the rainbow on the train. But and I think that's the essence of self-directed education. It's putting things in their way, but being ready for the learning to spark in all sorts of different directions. And you just can't do that in school. That just isn't part of the school mentality. And I think I put that in that table. Part of what you learn at school is, I'm really interested in that, but I can't do it right now. I've got to do this because this is, we're learning about the ancient Egyptians. So I can't start thinking about maths, even if I'm really interested in in algebra. I can't do that right now because I've got to do the ancient Egyptians. Whereas in self-directed learning, you follow those trails as they come up. And I think that's such a gift for children, but also for adults, actually, to be able to do that.
Hey podcast listeners, if you are enjoying the show, there's a small but very powerful thing you can do to support us, and it's completely free. If you can take a moment to rate, review and share the podcast, it means the world to us in terms of sharing all the wonky goodness that we're getting up to with more and more people. Thank you so much to everybody that's already left reviews. We do read them and try and reply to people if we can. Sharing it and getting the word out to more people really helps what we're doing. Thank you all so much.
You talk a bit about how kids who are self-directed in their education often spend longer in that kind of play-based learning, discovery-based learning to a much older age. And that's definitely something that we've noticed in our provision. And to kind of facilitate that and not judge it and completely value it, is really, really valuable. And then you speak about children often kind of naturally shifting to the more kind of practicing of skills that young people decide they want to improve. I want to learn this, so I'm going to get this app, or can you get me a tutor for this because I want to learn on this? And you write that often happens around puberty. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about your findings on this and people's stories on that.
Yeah. So this was something I wish I don't know of any real research on this. This is one of these things which, when my children were younger, it worried me. And I think it probably worries most home ed parents, that you see your children and when your children don't go to school. Well, when my children didn't go to school, I thought, do some play. We'll do more play. We'll do lots of play-based stuff until they're about 7 or 8, because that's what everybody says says. They say, oh, these Scandinavian countries, they've got so much better system. They don't start formal education until they're 7 or 8. I thought, great, we'll play for a couple more years. They'll be up to 7 or 8. They'll be all ready to do formal stuff. They'll want to start learning to read or all that kind of thing. Got to 7 or 8. Absolutely no change. Definitely no indication that they were ready to read. In fact, I'd say the opposite happened. I thought by the time they were getting to 7 or 8, they would be more like children in the school system. Actually, they were much less like children in the school system. So by that point, it was like, whoa, the gap between where the school children are and where we are is really quite huge at this point. There is no way I could imagine them going into school at this point. It just isn't, it absolutely couldn't really work. Not that I ever thought it'd work, but it really wouldn't work at that stage. And I was worried because I think, like most people who go to school, we have this idea that basically children are these kind of play-based learners. They learn through discovery. And the job of adults is kind of to pin them down and to stop them doing that. And to tell them, you need to think about the future. You need to start thinking about, you start working towards future goals and all this kind of thing. You need to, if you don't start doing this now, you won't get a good job. And children actually get told this remarkably early on in their lives. And I had this as well when my children didn't go to school. People were very quickly asking me about GCSEs and what I was going to do about GCSEs. And my children were 5. And it was kind of like, that is so far in the future. I'm not going to worry about that. Anyway, so when I was observing my own children and again, all the children around me that we knew because we were home ed, I did see that there was this kind of qualitative shift in how they did things. And actually, I noticed it first with both my children around the age of 9. And the first thing I noticed was that they wanted to learn how to ride a bicycle and they applied themselves to doing it. Mm-hmm. Whereas up to that point, they both would have liked to ride a bicycle. They'd like to be able to do it, but they didn't want to do the process of getting there. It was too many falling off, too much, too annoying. They would try a couple of times, they'd fall off, and then they say, no, I don't want to do it. And I would worry about that. And I think many parents do, they haven't got any sticking power. How are they ever going to learn to stick at things? And then they both got to 9. And I don't think 9 is, I do know from other parents, they said that about 9, they started to notice a kind of shift. And one day my son got up and he said, I'm going to learn how to ride that bicycle. I'm going to put on long sleeves, long trousers. I'm going to go out on the driveway and I don't want you to come. I'm going to do it. And he just went and he fell off 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 and he came back and he kind of had holes in his, on his legs and in his arms. And it took him about 2 or 3 days of falling off. And then he learned how to ride his bicycle. Mm-hmm. And my daughter 3 years later, had a completely different way of doing it. She said, I'm not going to fall off. You are going to stand behind me and run along behind me. And I'm going to do that until I'm ready to ride the bicycle. And again, we did it for about 3 afternoons. And then she was ready to ride the bicycle. In fact, in her case, this was when we lived in Hove. She said, I want to learn to ride to Brighton, which is 3 miles. I thought it was quite ambitious. But by the end of the week from when she decided she was riding, we rode to Brighton together, she and I.
Wow.
And I think the silly thing is that when I looked at the psychology literature on how children develop and how they learn, there is research that shows that it's around adolescence where young people start to develop this ability to manage themselves, to think about goals for the future, to set, to say, I'm going to do this, sort of control their impulses. So they do things like, I want to be able to ride my bicycle, so I'm going to fall off it lots of times, even though I don't really like falling off my bicycle, but I want to be able to ride my bicycle. Whereas when they're younger, they don't do that. They don't have that. They literally don't have that capacity to do that. So for them, they learn because what they're doing right now is really fun. Mm. So some children learn to read because they really like books and they really like being read to. And so they do that, but they're not thinking, I really want to be able to learn to read, so I'm going to spend lots of time reading books. Mm. But school kind of tries to do that to children before they are at that stage of doing it. And what I saw was that the young people I saw as they became adolescents, it was like they became sponges for learning stuff because suddenly it hadn't been messed with, is the way I thought about it. An adult hadn't come along and messed with their motivation earlier on. So they were able to say, right, I'd really like to learn Spanish. I'm going to start doing it. I'm going to learn it on Duolingo. I want to learn the piano. I'm going to start practicing. It was like this natural kind of evolution went on, which I just thought, it doesn't happen to young people in school because they've been told since they were 5 or 6 you must do these things now for the future. And at that time they were like, why? Don't see the point. But now they do see the point, and it's because they've grown up.
That's really interesting, because I was going to say, if I think about teenagers that I have worked with in the school system and my own experience of being a teenager and having teenage kids, impulse control is not the words that would have jumped straight to mind for either myself at 13 or many schooling 13. But it did make, as you've described that, then it's made me think. I was talking to some other home ed parents, and we were talking about how our children go to scouting groups at different levels, squirrels and beavers and cubs and all these things. And they're always in the evening. And we were saying how interesting we find it that the children who are home educating arrive at those groups almost with their like impulse control cup full. They can they can do it for an hour. And then, so my youngest is 4, and we're still at the stage where she still needs me to go with her every time and almost be touching her the whole time. It's that level. But the kids that I can see that have been in a school system all day, some of them are just burnt out, either burnt out attention wise or burnt out impulse control wise. And I find that really interesting, that idea of like a finite amount of impulse control existing, and then that, how you use it. Our teenagers getting asked to use that on their tie and their shirt being tucked in and standing in the left on the corridor. And so the cup is empty by the time you get to, now could you do some education? It's like, no, because this has been used up.
You've already used me up. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Yes. And I think there's also something really profound about the difference between impulse control when somebody's telling you to do something and impulse control for your own purposes.
Definitely.
So, and I think we confuse the two all the time with young people. When schools talk about self-control or self-regulation, generally they mean young people doing what we want them to do. And that's, we consider that to be self-control. If a young person behaves well and does what we want them to do, they've got good self-control. Whereas I don't see that as self-control, really. I see that as being controlled. And some young people respond much better to being controlled than others. They find it easier. Doesn't mean it's the right thing for them, but it also doesn't mean, it's interesting you talk about yourself at 13. These developments in young people are experience dependent. They don't just happen. So we develop the ability to set goals and things through opportunities to set goals. We develop the ability to control our impulses through chances to control our impulses, but they have to be real things coming from us. Do you see what I mean? Whereas we tend to think that this child's had lots of experience in controlling their impulses because they've been told what to do all the time. But that isn't controlling your impulses. That's just doing what you're told. And actually this kind of, I think of it as something a bit different. It's like, it's just like right now, I would like to go and, I don't know, play. I would like to go and just lie down, for example. But actually, I'd quite like to get this job done. So I'm going to go and do that instead. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I think of as real impulse control. This kind of being able to make choices where you're able to kind of put the thing that is most salient to you on a second level because you're going to do something else to a higher goal. And I don't think you can really do that just by being told to do it.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And we wanted to let you know that we want to hear from you, the Forest School community. If you've got questions, topics you'd like to explore, books you want us to review, share your ideas and thoughts with us by emailing childrenoftheforest@outlook.com. Your input is what fuels our episodes, and we can't wait to connect with you.
No, definitely not. I was just thinking as you were speaking there about that shift in terms of like, I want to do the hard thing and it's going to be hard, but I'm going to stick at it and be resilient. And it's something that comes up in the book a lot about gaming and using screens. For my son, that me noticing that shift for him came through gaming. So he went from becoming really frustrated with something and then just going, no, I never want to do that again. It was awful. It's horrible, frustrating. oh my gosh, I really want to play Zelda and I really want to defeat this thing or whatever. And then it came with him going, right, can you look up how to do it? How, you know, so another game has completed this quest, and can you sit next to me and can you read me the thing and I'll do it step by step, and failing and carrying on and failing and carrying on, which is, I think, probably a light bulb moment for me in terms of, you know, the negative connotations about gaming and screen time are just rife and pervasive through our society, aren't they?
Yeah.
Especially in the world of, like, you know, kids who aren't at school. That, oh my God, you know, just unlimited screen time, or they're spending all the time gaming, like it's just so evil. And for me, just watching him do that, I was like, oh my God, that's the first time I've ever seen him have that kind of resilience and, you know, be knocked back.
He's setting a goal for the future.
He is, and he's managing his emotions through that as well. Like, he's going, I am angry, but I'm not so angry that I'm going to turn off. I'm going to take some deep breaths and I'm going to carry on. And I was like, there's no way he would have done that through any other activity, because gaming is his passion.
That's what works for him.
You know,
how old was he? How old was he when you recognized that?
10.
Yeah, there you are. It's exactly the age I would predict. That's exactly when it is. And also the other thing that's so interesting about that, and about my bike example actually, is that, again, adults tend to think that this is going to happen for the things that adults value. And actually it's a bit like the green shoots. You see it really when children are doing the things that they value. And that's the things I find really exciting, exactly those moments where it's like, actually, I want to get better at playing this game. And so I'm going to apply myself to it. Whereas many adults are just looking for, I want to get better at maths, so I'm going to apply myself to it. But actually, I think self-directed education is all about process, and it's all about seeing those processes and valuing those processes. Whereas unfortunately, as a society, we tend to undervalue the things that children really are drawn to doing. And we overvalue the things that adults think they should be doing. So we often don't see that kind of amazing development. The other thing I often see with screens is emotion regulation. I just see kids really practicing that sense of, okay, it's all gone wrong. I've lost my house. It's been burnt down. I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to carry on, you know. And even the thing of dying, everything, you know, you die, you lose all your stuff. And for a while, children are like, that's it. No, I'm not going, you know, I hate this game. It's a stupid game, not doing it again. And then you see them being able to say, actually, it's okay. I can cope with that. It's like repeated practice, isn't it, of these things without anybody actually having to die or burn the house down, which is great. I mean, go on.
I was just going to say, can I ask, because as we're moving into this stuff about, you know, emotional regulation, and in the book you talk about parents being like anchors, you know, calm and stable, which is definitely one of those things that's really easy on a piece of paper to write down, like, you should be a calm thing for your job. But we live in the real world and we're real people, and we also have stuff, you know, going on. Do you have any like success stories or like interviews that you did with people who found ways to be successful with their own like anxiety or feelings of being overwhelmed to support their children?
I think that was a constant theme, really, of parents going on the journey to do that. I think it's a huge journey. And I think the first step is just realizing that it is a journey and that it's something you need to do, because I think most parents don't necessarily realize that, you know. And I think, again, if your children have been in school, the parent will often see their role as helping the child to succeed in school, and that as being the main priority, and other things are sort of subjugated to that, you know. So it's okay to be quite angry, for example, or to be quite punitive, because it's so important that they do their reading or their maths and that kind of thing. And it's a bit like flipping that around, isn't it, and saying, actually, I think that would definitely be my stance. We flip that around and you say, actually, nothing is more important than that safety and that unconditional relationship. And so instead of putting your effort into how am I going to get them to do maths, you're kind of putting your effort into how can I look after myself and keep myself balanced. And I think that parents do need to take that on, not just in the moment, but I think particularly home educating parents, because it can be relentless, absolutely relentless. It never stops, you know, whereas for many parents, they're often kind of holding out for that time. They go to school, you can hand them over for a certain amount of hours every day, get a bit of breathing time back. I definitely had that mindset when my children were young, that I thought they would go to school. I would then be able to prioritize my career. I would be able to prioritize the things that I felt valuable to me again. And then they didn't go to school. And so that didn't happen. But I think there's something about you have to build your life so that it does have spaces for you as a parent to be the person, you know, whether that's just getting out the house. If you never get out the house, that you need someone else to be with the children in the house so that you can get out the house, if that's something that's useful for you. It's being able to do kind of the sensory things that we do with our children, but for us as well. And I sometimes say to parents, it's about like rediscovering your sensory, your love of things like kinetic sand, perhaps, or slime, you know, and doing it for you rather than doing it for them. And just letting yourself notice the things that help you feel differently, help you to calm your nervous system, and then doing them. Deliberately doing them, whether that's exercise is a really key thing, or listening to music and allowing yourself to have that space. Because I think when our children are babies, most of us, we give up all sorts of things to look after our babies. That's how we do it. We have to, because their needs are so big and so, you know, obvious. And then as they get a bit older, we take back a little bit of that space, but not always, not if our children are very high needs, not if we home educate. And so I sometimes meet parents who are maybe 10 years in, their oldest child is 10, and it's never got any easier than those baby times. You know, it's been at that level of demand the whole time. And at that point, they are usually burnt out and often depressed, because you can't give continuously like that for such a long time. And so I think then it is about how can you reclaim a bit of that space for yourself, just because otherwise it's not going to be sustainable. You're not going to get through the next 10 years if it hasn't got some bits where you're recharging as well as being drained.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wem and I both actually said, as you mentioned, you need to get out of the house. It's triggered a thing. Wem and I have both come in to work. So I read the book and then gave it to Wem, and Wem's going to, and she went, did you get to the bit? And I went, oh, I can't remember. And then she went, it's the bit about percolating, going outside. And it's like, yes, that is the one.
Yeah. Because we've read
amazing.
Ross Greene's Explosive Child. Yeah. So, you know, we've read that and we've talked about it on the podcast, and I've recommended that book to so many people. But again, it has also been a book that I've read and gone, I get it. It doesn't quite work. So you've kind of adapted his, like he calls it collaborative problem solving solutions, isn't he? CPS, and you've kind of adapted this and made it more accessible for families, especially with demand-avoidant children and children who are finding life tricky. Can you explain a bit about that?
Yes, so I had very similar reaction to the Explosive Child. I like it. I love his central thing. Kids do well when they can. I think that is a brilliant, brilliant way of changing your mentality and everything. But when I read the dialogues, it's just like, well, it would be lovely if they responded like this, but I know for sure that they're not going to. And I felt, yes, that the percolating idea came out of discussions I had with actually an unschooling parent, Heidi Steele, who runs unschooling stuff. And we were talking about how we actually do these things in our families. You know, saying we do have this attitude, kids do well as they can, but we are definitely not having those kind of collaborative discussions that Ross Greene would suggest in his book. The role plays are not like the role plays, but also that I felt there needed to be a kind of recognition that in many families, there needs to be a dropping of parent expectations as well. I think Ross Greene's book is about children in school, and he will talk about how, you know, you can have the expectation that they go to school, for example, and they have homework. And then we've got these kids those aren't the expectations anymore. And I think parents need to kind of always be asking themselves, actually, what are my expectations? But my main thinking with the percolating method was that if we've got children who are demand avoidant or who find it hard to change, then we need to think about that as something that we're going to help them with. So we basically need to be introducing ideas, expecting a strong and negative response, and then continuing to introduce ideas and continuing and actually expect that they will have this kind of arc. The first time they hear something, they will probably go, no way, go away, never say that to me again. And you go, okay, that's fine. That's your response. And then the next time I'm going to suggest it again because it's important. And the other reason that I really wanted to write that chapter was because I do meet quite a lot of parents who have really reeled back on demands and on expectations, and everybody's kind of stuck. because they're too worried about introducing anything new. So it's like, they had an awful time at school, perhaps. Child's come out of school, child doesn't want to leave the house, and nobody leaves the house for a really long time. And the child, everybody becomes kind of encapsulated in this thing of, we can't do these things. We can't go out. We can't do this. This will make them too anxious. We can't do this. And I thought there really has to be a model somewhere for how you can get out of that, how you can gradually start to expand your child's comfort zone and your comfort zone. Because actually it's the two, isn't it? It's, if you're a parent whose child's gone through a really hard time, you absolutely don't want to go back there again. And so you kind of protect them. And the thing is that growing up is a process of expanding your comfort zone. It has to be. Otherwise the child will be stuck and the family will be stuck. So there has to be a continuous, just pushing slightly. And if the child's not going to do that because of the experiences that child has had, I mean, in many cases, children do that. But if they're not, the parent has to do it. The parent has to be just gradually pushing those edges, even if you get a really strong response from your child, because some children, that's how it is. You do get a really strong response. That's just how they are. And you have to kind of factor that in, I think, to your thinking that, okay, we're going to suggest this. They're probably going to go ballistic. We can ride that out. And we'll suggest it. So the other thing I say in that method is be really sure that what you're doing is important and is worth doing. It's definitely not a method to make children do things that you think they should be doing. But it's like, so I think the example I give in the book is a single mother who really needs to leave the house and her child doesn't want to leave the house. And it's how they kind of solve that problem together.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. It's such a common story, isn't it? It's so many families I see, especially around the kind of teenage years, where someone maybe has been in secondary school and just had an awful time, and then they go, and sometimes not even leaving the house, but not leaving their bedroom, and their safe spaces, like gaming and just being in their room, and and part of the sort of unschooling thing being deschooling, and you spent and lots of people's advice, if you see on a kind of online forum or whatever, a parent really having a hard time with this, and we understand about deschooling, but it's been a year and they still haven't come out of their room, and parents' response is often like, well, you just haven't done it long enough, you just need to keep going with the and it's like, I'm not sure how I feel about that, and like to have a system to kind of follow through in some suggested ways of addressing it, I think will be helpful for so many people.
I felt exactly the same way looking at stuff. And I think as a psychologist, I was always thinking, okay, but where's the circumstances for change here? Have we actually set the things up for change? And also I know that anxiety blocks people from doing things. People can't necessarily do things because of anxiety. And I think we get caught up sometimes, both in the kind of neurodiversity world and also in the self-directed education world, in this juxtaposition between autonomy and anxiety. So we have a lot of focus on autonomy, letting children make choices, helping them be in the driving seat of what they're doing. But high anxiety can actually prevent you from being autonomous, really, because you can't really make a decision if your decision is based on what's not going to make me anxious. If your decision is made on the basis of how can I avoid my anxious emotions, then you have really seriously limited your life. Not on purpose, but your life is going to be really limited. And if your parents think that that's you just being autonomous and having control over your life, then you've got the potential for no change here. And we know that anxiety gets worse and worse the more that you don't push against it. You need to be just slightly pushing against it. And people always start saying to me, but what about school? And aren't you saying they should be pushed to go to school? And no, I'm never, ever saying that. And I am never saying that we should be forcing young people to do things against their will in order to treat their anxiety, which is unfortunately sometimes said. You've got to expose them to it. They've got to be made to do it. Never am I saying that, but I am saying we need to find ways to gradually expand their world.
And to look at that threshold of tolerance, isn't it? It's that kind of like, and having an acute awareness of your child or the child you're working with, maybe to go, I'm just going to push a little bit. Oh, now I'm traumatizing them. I'm going to reel in now. Like that is too much.
You're
quickly.
You're dancing with, it's a dance. You're always dancing with them. You're always just pushing and you're going to get it wrong. And that's okay. It's okay for it to be a bit wrong sometimes, because otherwise, if you can't make mistakes, it's never going to expand. Things are never going to grow.
Yeah. On the subject of, comfort zones expanding, one of the notes that we've got down here is in this most recent book you've put about demand-avoidant children. pressure detector children are a gift. And I think that's definitely true for, well, at least my own. I think I can speak for Wem and say, yes, the more you work with people who are demand avoidant, the more you get called out on your own pressures and you go, yeah, I suppose I am. But could you tell us a little bit about that pressure detector thing?
Yes. So I think some children are really good at detecting pressure in their environment, pressure from other people. And I think more home educated children are better at this actually because they haven't had it squashed. I think young children are often really quite good at this generally as a group. But as they get older, the children who are really sensitive to pressure, who pick it up, it makes them feel anxious. We often would then call them demand avoidant because they don't want those anxious feelings. So they try and get away from those anxious feelings. But they also I think they sort of shine a light on the control, like they shine a light on the school system because all the things that other children have been kind of trained into accepting, these children refuse to be trained. They're like, no way, I'm not having anything to do with this. And that can be really difficult if adults then respond with punishment and being punitive, and that can go really wrong very, very quickly. But it's also a kind of way of seeing, suddenly you see all this control around you that you hadn't seen before. And particularly if you went to school and you went all the way through and you didn't necessarily pick up on all of that pressure, you're like, gosh, well, when you spend a lot of time with a pressure sensitive child, you can go into somewhere like a library, for example, and you can suddenly see, my goodness me, there's a lot of pressure in this environment, to behave in certain ways, to do certain things, not to do other things. And actually this child doesn't respond well to that kind of pressure, or just signs like things like, please don't walk on the grass, or all these things that some children are really sensitive to. They see those things and they're like, why shouldn't I walk on that grass? What's wrong with walking on the grass? Yeah. And I think we need people like that in our society. We need people who see through the pressure and the agendas. And I think as an adult, when you spend time with a child like that, you become really acutely aware of your own hidden agendas. I think I might have put an example in the book, I can't remember, but, children who can feel the hidden agenda in something like, it stopped raining. A parent who looks out the window and says, it stopped raining. And the child says, no. And the child, and that the child knows that what's coming next is, let's go out. And they've picked up the pressure in that straight away. And just, all those things. And the parent, if the parent is open to it, is then able to go, yeah, you're right. Actually, I was just kind of softly trying to get you into leaving the house, and you knew it.
Yeah, that's where the declarative language thing. Yeah. So, life-changing for us as practitioners and parents to learn about declarative language and start using it. But if you are using it to
get compliance,
they call you out on it. So you can't use it in that way. You can only genuinely use it if you're ready to hear, no thanks.
No, you have to be ready to hear the no. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not ready, but I am okay with it.
Yes, that's all right. It's your own process as well.
Yeah.
But also I think there's a genuineness about it. Like, I know, again, if you're able to say, actually, I really wish you'd said yes to that, that's easier for many pressure-sensitive children to manage than adult pretending that they don't want you to say yes, because it's out there. Then they can say, well, actually, I don't want to say yes, and that's fine. You've had a discussion about it. But when it's all under the surface, when it's kind of like pressure, but I'm not going to admit to any pressure. No, I'm fine with you not coming, but I'm not really. Then they pick up on that.
Yeah. I saw another example with going, just like being really honest about your feelings. Yeah, it was another author, I can't remember who it was now, but saying they were trying to use declarative language with their child, and their child was completely picking up on it. And so they or it was like, I think it was naming feelings or something. So the child was having a hard time, and the parent was going, you're frustrated. And the kid's like, shut up.
Absolutely. That is so annoying. My children used to do that all the time. Stop being a psychologist. We don't.
And
go on.
This author was saying it's actually much more helpful for their child to go, I am genuinely, as a parent, having a really tricky time now because I know you're really frustrated by the thing you're doing. However, we need to do it because of this. So I'm kind of in two minds right now as to whether to try and encourage you to do it, but I feel really bad that you're
Yes.
feeling that way. And just that is declarative. That is true declarative language. You are genuinely going, this is my thought process right now.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm not really expecting any kind of answer. I'm just being
but
really
this is
clear.
the dilemma. You're naming the dilemma. And I think of that as making the invisible visible for children.
Yes.
Like you're sort of showing them, this is my process, and you're owning your process, aren't you? Whereas so much of the time as adults with children, we're trying to pretend the process is not there. We're trying to pretend that it's all fine. And I think that naming the dilemma is, I do that a lot. And there's sort of, well, there's this, but there's this. And I really don't know which one is the right thing to do here. And I feel that tension because they feel it too.
Yeah.
Oh, Naomi, thank you so much. I could chat to you for another hour very happily. But I'm conscious of, not it taking up too much of your day. For people that have been listening and want to find out more about your work and where they can find out a bit more stuff, where should they head?
So if you go to my website, which is naomifisher.co.uk, you can link to most of the other things I do there. I have a Facebook page, which is Dr. Naomi Fisher. I also have a Substack, which is called Think Again, Naomi C. Fisher. And it's like the Substack is perfect for people who who don't really like social media. You basically get a thing of every week to your inbox. It's free. And then, of course, there are my 2 books. There is Changing Our Minds, and then there's A Different Way to Learn. And I do quite a lot of webinars. So if people are interested in listening to, I do webinars about low demand parenting with Eliza Fricker. And then I do webinars on all sorts of different aspects, mostly of mental health and autism, or helping parents. I try and help parents to help their children, because I found that I get so many requests. So many people want me to see their children, and I just can't do it. One-on-one is a very inefficient way to see people, actually. And so I'm trying to do these webinars which will equip parents with things that they can do to help their children.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you. So thank
very
you.
welcome. It's always lovely to talk to people who've read my book in detail, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did say that, didn't I? I forgot about that bit.
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
It's great.
Right, we'll call it there then. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.